presentar a nuestra siguiente expositora. Ella es la señora Durschinger, que voy a resumir un poco de su background, que Leslie, después de 20 años de experiencia, digamos que probada en los servicios financieros, pues se decide en fundar la empresa Terra Global Capital en el año 2006, que básicamente es una empresa que está emprendida en facilitar un enfoque de pagos basados en desempeño para reducciones de emisiones en bosques y en uso del suelo, y que fundamentalmente produzca beneficios a comunidades. Terra Global Capital, Leslie, como parte de Terra Global, actualmente es líder en temas de finanzas de carbono. Está proveyendo su expertise técnico y capital de inversiones a los clientes buscando nuevas formas de colaborar e innovar en estos temas de red. Antes de Leslie estar en Terra, pues alcanzó, digamos que, posiciones o puestos importantes en las áreas de mercados, inversiones, como asesora en temas de manejo de riesgo, seguros, a nivel global. Y pues también actualmente Leslie es parte del Steering Committee del BCS. También es miembro del Comité de Estándares Sociales y Ambientales para REDD. Es miembro permanente del grupo de trabajo del BCS para el enfoque jurisdiccional. Y bueno, también tiene un background trabajando con la empresa privada. Anteriormente, Leslie trabajó para empresas como JP Morgan, para Merrill Lynch, para Barclays Global Investors y para Charles Schwab. Creo que es un breve resumen de toda la experiencia que ha acumulado Leslie en estos temas relacionados con las finanzas, los mercados de carbono. Yo quiero presentar entonces que Leslie nos va a compartir su ponencia, que es financiamiento para red, definiendo los componentes de una estrategia nacional de financiamiento para red. Yo creo que tenemos aquí una hora de trabajo con Leslie y esperamos aprovechar. Vas a presentar en inglés, ¿cierto, Leslie? Entonces, para quienes, por favor, quieran hacer eficiente o necesiten, allá están los equipos de traducción. Bienvenida, Leslie, gracias.
Gracias, Marco. Well, I would also like to thank everyone for being here. As the finance lead for the USAID-funded RCCP program, we're so very happy to have the chance to have this technically focused workshop, and then the follow-on workshop, which will tie the technical understanding into the ability to bring it to the negotiating table at Lima. So I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, UN REDD and IDB, who without their support, both financial and technical support, we wouldn't be able to have hosted this conference today. I'd like to thank the speakers who have come from as far as all the way Brazil, Geneva, London. It's nice to have you all here. Thank you for coming. But more importantly, the event is really for the countries that have come. So thanks for the Dominican Republic and Costa Rica and Peru, and Panama and Guatemala, Argentina and Honduras for coming in a very busy time and sending people to come and participate in the workshop. So I'm going to jump into the weeds. I understand that expression doesn't translate into Spanish, but I'm going to talk with some technical detail around a framework that is in this paper here, this Plan Financiero para Programas Nacionales, which Luis and I worked on. It's still in draft form, but it lays out a framework for REDD, National REDD financial planning, some of which we've started to test run with Guatemala. It is a starting point. As Gustavo said from Peru, the devil's really in the details. So being able to decouple very complex programs into units that we can actually do financial planning for is quite important. So this report's available in both Spanish and English, and once it's sort of buffed up and reviewed, it'll be publicly available, but you can pick up a copy outside if you don't have one. So try to stay awake for the devil's in the details. I'm going to talk about a framework that defines the components of REDD for financial planning. But let's see here if I can read this. Stand back here. So why do we even care about financial planning? What are the objectives? Well, it's a way to provide feedback for what is feasible from a financial perspective within the national strategy. And it's not as if you will do one financial plan and that's it. It really is meant to be an iterative process. So for example, as we're starting to work with Costa Rica and Guatemala on their national REDD financing plans, it's possible that not all the inputs are at the level of detail necessary. So that process will start, it'll have sets of assumptions, and over time it will improve and provide feedback to refine the REDD strategies. What will you end up with at the end of the financial planning process? There's a host of things, and I'll review these at the end of my presentation, but you'll have the whole set of budgetary expenditures that are necessary at all the levels of the national program. You'll have projections, financial projections for each component. You'll have a good sense of the costs. You'll have the costs laid out for the land managers. We use the term land managers here because landowners is a little bit exclusive, but those people who actually have to change land use to produce emission reductions and other productive related income. You'll have the results of those activities, which ones are profitable, which ones are sustainable. So you'll have the whole set of activities, you'll have the financial perspective. And you'll also, and quite importantly, be able to know how much you need in additional funding. And I'd add to that, you'll be able to tell what sources of funds and what financial instruments may be appropriate for filling those funding gaps. Sometimes it'll be grant funding. We hope sometimes it'll include other sources, such as private sector investment. It could include municipal bond issuance. There's a whole host of sources of funds, and knowing which ones are appropriate for which components of your REDD program is absolutely essential, and we hope the financial planning process provides you that information. So it really is an opportunity to not only understand all the financials, but also to perform a competitive analysis, i.e. how competitive from both a financial standpoint as well as the other development value that come is your national REDD program. So that's what you hope to get out of financial planning. It's a pretty aggressive list of things, but if you take a very systematic approach, we think that the financial planning process will provide this information for you. So we had a really great opportunity with our technical partners of trying to come up with names for certain parts of our agenda. We were on calls with our UN REDD partners, and we realized that even for those of us who work on REDD finance, we used different terms to mean the same thing. And it made it virtually impossible sometimes to actually figure out what each other was talking about. So we have laid out a vocabulary here. Not everyone might like this, but at least you'll know when we say this word, this is what we mean. We've tried to make it fairly consistent with what we think most people think of when they use these words. Some of them are very basic terms that we all have used over the last however many years. Some of them are new terms. So we call the National REDD program everything you do to implement your national REDD strategy. So the program is getting it done. The strategy is What are the things you're prioritizing doing? The use of the word strategic options, I'm not sure, is that in the text somewhere, strategic options? I'm not quite sure where it came from, but a lot of people were using strategic options. I suspect that's from the REDD strategy, and they are the things that have been prioritized within the REDD strategy for implementation. So that's the way we think of strategic options. And we'd also believe that governments will change their strategic options over time as information on implementation effectiveness comes in, as conditions change. So strategic options may start out with the first full draft of the REDD strategy, but they could change over time. So what we developed is, for financial planning, a sort of 4-level framework. And you actually saw a little glimpse of that with Jacobo's presentation. And we did this so that we could disaggregate the REDD program into the pieces that would allow you to build budgets accurately and to also stress test those budgets, i.e. to be able to see if you change main factors, how do the economics and the financials change. It also allows you to identify what kind of funding sources are relevant to approach for those. Because at certain levels, there's no way a private investor is likely to invest in that part of the program. But at other levels, absolutely, that is an investment-worthy component. So the decoupling is also meant to facilitate your ability to identify and attract the sources you need to finance different pieces. So what are these 4 levels, as we've called them? So there's the REDD administration. That's what you have to do before you produce one emission reduction. There's absolutely nothing that happens to produce an emission reduction. So I'll give you some ideas of what those are. But clearly they're primarily administrative. Then there's REDD national policies, which are the policies that you put in place and the expenses associated with those policies that facilitate the REDD program and the REDD strategy. Then we have, at level 3, the much contested word of subprograms. So subprograms, the way we consider those for financial modeling, is they are the sort of programmatic pieces that the government promotes, either from a national level or subnational level, to actually promote land managers to change land use. PES is a great example of that. Now, the reason we call them subprograms is not to create another word, because no one needs another word or an acronym in our sector, for sure. But because we always call the National REDD program a program, these are components. So that's why we've named them programs. They're government-led, so we call them programs. So I'd be happy to change this word subprograms if anybody comes up with a better one. But right now, subprograms are meant to be government-mobilized resources to help promote land use change activities with land managers. And then sort of the last or the lowest level, this is where, the expression, the rubber hits the road, this is where, in most countries, this is where the emission reductions get produced. Now, they may not be able to be produced without the subprograms and the policies, of course, but they really are the things that land managers do to change the way they manage land to produce emission reductions and removals, from deforestation, degradation, sequestration, even agricultural emissions. As well as, we hope, to actually also generate, in many cases, additional productive revenue from ag, forestry, non-timber forest product related activities. So those are the 4 levels, the exciting levels with their names. Here's a graphic. Is there like a little pointer thing on here? Here we go. No pointy. So you can see in the upper left, you have, this is a little bit small, but you have the REDD program administration, which is level 1. And this is the strategy, the legal framework, the administration. Then you have level 2, which are the policies. And the kinds of things that tend to fall in that category would be policy reform, Land use planning that's done at a sort of sweeping level. For example, Indonesia decides they're not going to give out any more concessions for oil palm conversion. So very policy oriented. Possibly commodities and extractive policy is an example, but there's many.